Howdy, folks. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Chris Salcedo Show here on Newsmax TV. With Obama's third term coming into being, America's foreign policy will now be run out of Beijing and Tehran, as it was in Obama's first two terms. Tonight, KT McFarland and Fred Fleitz, they are here to sound the alarm on the reinstituting of a foreign policy that has failed so spectacularly in the past. And back here at home, the socialists have once again put their hands around the throat of America. The job of we the people, as I see it, is to make sure they are not successful at choking out the American values that we all used to share: the dignity of work, freedom of religion, economic freedom, and of course, freedom of speech. With the socialist sweep of Washington, all of those fundamental American ideals, well, these ideals that we've taken for granted, they are now under legitimate threat. Leaders in the GOP are signaling they are not into fighting that threat. Rather, they seek to surrender to it. Many of them are calling on you to do the same under the banner of coming together, a collectivist banner. We'll ask two members of the GOP how they will protect their constituents from the ravages that are sure to come from an American government that is now run by the radical left. And Dick Morris will be here to lay out the political landscape as America returns to the failed Obama years. Meanwhile, the effort to silence voices of that dissent from left-wing extremists, those efforts continue. Censorship is undertaken by those who know they're doing wrong. That's the reality we dispense in tonight's preamble. One of the Salcedo Show's axioms states, the liberals project qualities onto others that they themselves have in abundance. It's true. Throughout history, small-minded leftists have sought to diminish people they sought to exterminate or enslave. Today's modern left is no different. They falsely accused President Trump and we conservatives of being racists and fascists. They did so to justify, for example, months of arson, looting, and killing of innocent people. Their actions and statements revealed their hatred of whites. Freedom of speech, the free market, also on their hate list. In essence, liberal socialists revealed it was they who were actually guilty of the sins of which they were accusing others. If you think that socialist Democrats are ashamed of the violence they dished out over most of 2020, think again. During the campaign, if you went to Antifa.com, you were taken to the Harris-Biden campaign page. Now, if you type in Antifa.com, it takes you to whitehouse.gov. How many in the so-called press is going to tell you that? I'd venture nobody, because the Chris Salcedo Show actually believes in informing our audience rather than giving talking points issued by any political party or administration. We are being targeted by those who claim they wish to support democracy. Max Boot, a Russian-born Trump critic, wrote in the pages of the Washington Post that he's a big believer in censorship in the name of democracy. If that sounds like a contradiction, you'd be right. But to a crazed Trump hater, silencing dissenting voices for having differing views than your very own makes perfect sense to them. Now, to be fair, historical figures have come to the very same conclusion. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Xi Jinping, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, to name a few. They think it's perfectly normal to silence those who disagree with their left-wing views. Max Boot wrote the following in the Post. There is a whole infrastructure of incitement that will remain intact even after Trump leaves office. Just as we do with foreign terrorist groups, so with domestic terrorists, we need to shut down the influencers who radicalize people and set them on a path toward violence and sedition. Apparently, it doesn't apply to BLM folks. Max Boot, perhaps it should be Max Jack Boot, he continued to drill down into his censorship specifics. Anyone who cherishes our democracy should be grateful to the management of Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites for their newfound sense of social responsibility. That's what liberals are now calling censorship. We should expect at least the same level of responsibility from broadcast media, and in particular from Fox News, which has the largest reach on the right. Notice Max Boot didn't call for censorship of the left's media outlets, even though they're guilty of saying outrageous and hateful things when the GOP is in charge. As we reported this week, CNN, where Mr. Boot is a fellow contributor, they began pushing for conservative media outlets, and only conservative media outlets, such as Newsmax TV, to be banned from broadcast via cable distribution. So Max Boot, wants to silence your liberty-loving Latino here. Now, can you imagine if Trump proposed shutting down liberal channels with minority anchors? What would the outcry be? They would all be saying, President Trump, a fascist and a racist. So why does Max Boot and CNN get to call for censorship of Latino voices like mine and other voices that they disagree with and not be held to that same standard? Well, that's an easy answer. Because the press is largely liberal, and thus it's unfair. They don't believe in applying standards or the law equally. Ironically, neither does their favorite political party, the Socialist Democrats. Here at Newsmax TV, we have a lot of conservative voices. We all have our own unique angles on how to approach government, the pop culture, election integrity, and foreign policy. Being conservative, we can meet in the middle, all of us, and talk in good faith, knowing the truth is the objective we all share. Our liberal competitors, they can't make that claim. They do not seek the truth, nor do they have diverse opinions. That's why we call them collectivists. They are group thinkers, and they don't have the intellect for diverse thought. That's why guys like Max Boot hate us, because we will not conform. We won't adopt his narrow and thin-skinned worldview. We choose to remain diverse. And that's why they despise us, and they want to silence our voices. Now, there are some words of wisdom that Jack and his buddies over at CNN probably don't have a prayer of understanding, but hey, they can Google it. Well, wait a minute. That is, if Google hasn't banned these pearls of wisdom. Here's the first. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. The second, popular speech needs no defense. In a week where we celebrated the great Dr. Martin Luther King for saying some pretty unpopular things in his day, words that led to conflict, words that led to, yes, violence. Well, let me just say, I'm glad guys like Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, and Max Boot weren't around in the 1960s trying to censor those who gave Dr. King his right to be heard, the right of American free speech.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.